All right, today you're going to learn one of the most powerful ways to hack your brain for high performance using this simple strategy. We are going to teach you how to hack your brain to stop using sugar for fuel and to start using fat. All right, so I realize this may be a new concept for a lot of you out there, so I want to kind of run through this a little bit just so you have an idea of what's coming down the line here. So for a while, we thought that sugar was the only fuel source that the brain could actually use for fuel. Sugar would come from things like your carbohydrates, like breads, pastas, potatoes, things like that. Even some vegetables have higher amounts of carbohydrates than others, because carbohydrates, when they get broken down in the body, turn into sugar, or what we call glucose. And glucose can even be found in fruits and different things like that. And we thought that that was the only fuel source that the brain would use. But more recently, we have found that the brain can actually use fat for fuel, because fat, when it gets broken down to these little tiny units, turns into ketones. And what we found is that ketones can actually go directly from the blood, cross the blood vessel, and go directly into your brain and actually be used as a fuel source. And what we found is that there's actually some really incredible benefits when your brain starts using fat for fuel versus sugar, which we'll talk about right after this. But what happens is when your brain starts using ketones, it puts you into this really cool state, which you may have heard of before, called ketosis. And you may have heard or sound something similar to this because of this word, keto. Keto is becoming a huge buzzword in the health community for many different reasons, but mostly because ketosis is the state of optimal performance. And when you get into this state, especially mild ketosis, it puts your brain into super high performance. And the trick is, your body and your brain, it wants to use sugar first. It doesn't want to use fat. So if there's sugar present in your body, it's not going to use fat. So the trick is, how do we teach our body to start using fat for fuel versus sugar? And we'll talk about that later. But next up, we're going to be talking about the top 5 reasons why you need to be teaching your brain and your body to start using fat for fuel. So the first reason why we want to use fat for fuel rather than sugar is because fat is a much cleaner fuel source than sugar is. For 2 reasons. One, when we look at fat and sugar side by side, you're going to get more energy from fat than you will from sugar. When you break it down, there's more units of energy that get produced from fat versus sugar. Now that's really cool, but you could easily go, all right, well, if I'm just going to get more energy from fat, but I like sugar a lot more, I'm just going to eat more sugar to balance it out, right? It makes sense. But that's not the kicker. Here's the kicker. With that added energy that you're going to get, you're also going to get less inflammation from fat versus sugar. Because what happens is when your mitochondria, which are your cells' battery chargers, they basically take the food that you just ate, turn it into energy for your body to be able to use. Sugar actually produces more what we call oxidative stress from that conversion. And that oxidative stress, think of that like inflammation. Oxidative stress basically forms rust in our cells, in our body, which wreaks havoc on our health, yes, but it also wrecks your brain performance. So if you really want to take your brain to the next level and put it into a state of high performance, you need to start using fat for fuel, because you're also, 1, you're going to get more energy, but 2, you're going to create less inflammation, which is going to allow your brain to have more consistency, more productivity, longer and better. Now, the second reason is going to be when you start using fat for fuel rather than sugar, you're going to increase your levels of GABA in your brain and in your central nervous system. Now, GABA is this really helpful neurotransmitter. It's this really helpful chemical that helps put our brain and our nervous system into a state of calm. It's basically your rest, your relax, but also the more GABA you're going to get, you're going to be more resilient to stress. So it's going to help improve your mood, make you more resilient to stress. But lastly, and most importantly, it's going to help you sleep better as well. Now, the third reason you want to use fat for fuel rather than sugar is when you start using fat for fuel, you are going to have substantial anti-inflammatory benefits. Now, remember, kind of like we talked about before, the brain is very, very sensitive to inflammation. When you have more inflammation, it basically bogs your brain down, makes it slower, it doesn't perform as well, and that's not what you want for a super high-performing brain. So what it does is when you increase your levels of fat, it actually increases your levels of what's called glutathione. And glutathione is the most powerful antioxidant your body can produce. And antioxidants, kind of like we were saying before, remember that oxidative stress? Antioxidant prevents oxidative stress from building up. It helps prevent that rust from forming in your cells, which also helps lower inflammation, helps your brain perform better, and it helps it achieve that state of high performance that we want for your brain. Now, as an added bonus, as you're starting to use fat for fuel, guess what? You're actually going to burn fat. So even though you're going to be feeling better, you're going to be thinking more clearly, you're going to have more energy, more focus, more motivation, you're actually going to be losing weight at the same time. Isn't that pretty cool? If you do the right steps. Because what happens, think about this, if you're not using sugar for fuel and you're actually using fat, where do you think your body's going to get that fat from? It's going to get it, one, from your diet, but also it's going to get it, two, from your own body. So this is a really cool hack in that you're not only going to be feeling great, you're also going to be losing weight at the same time, and that's just a nice added bonus with using fat for fuel rather than sugar. All right, so obviously the next question is, how do we actually turn our brain and our body to actually using fat for fuel rather than sugar? And now this won't be a complete exhaustive resource on how to do this. You can find more on this on our blog as well. But I'll give you basically the nuts and bolts and the quick bullet points on how to do this. So obviously the first step, if you want to stop using sugar for fuel and using fat, if our body really wants to use sugar, we got to make sure we're not putting sugar back into our body. So that means staying away from things like sugar, candy, sodas, anything that has any processed sugar in it. You got to stick away from those. Even lower your fruit intake, especially things like bananas, pineapples. Those are loaded with sugar, which really put your blood sugar levels into a spike. But also, we got to take away a lot of the carbohydrates. Now, I'm not saying take away all of them, but you really want to reduce them as much as possible. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to avoid things like bread, pastas, potatoes, things like that. Sweet potatoes can be okay, maybe at night, just a little bit of them. But you definitely want to reduce your intake of carbohydrates so that your body can actually start using fat for fuel. Now, the next step would obviously be, if we're going to not get carbohydrates, we need some sort of fuel. And that fuel is going to come from fat. That's going to make sure that, one, you're full, because when you stop eating as many carbohydrates as you're used to, your body's going to be a little bit hungry. It's going to be a little bit ticked off. So you want to add more fats in, because fats actually make you feel, one, more full, but they provide loads of clean energy, as we talked about earlier. Now, what I mean by using fat is I mean healthy fats. That's very important. Those can come from things like coconut oil, avocados, Alaskan caught salmon, nuts. Walnuts are a great source of healthy omega-3s and DHA. Those are some really great brain food fats that you're going to want to start incorporating into your diet to basically balance out the less carbs that you're going to get. And once you start doing these two, you're basically going to teach your brain to start using that fat as fuel. And guess what? It's going to become easier for your body. And that's what we call being fat adapted, is your body's going to start using fat as its preferred fuel source rather than sugar. Now, that's going to take some time to work through, and that transition of going from sugar-heavy diet to a fat-heavy diet can be a little bit challenging. So some of the things you can do that we'll talk about later is things like bone broth can really help balance that out and really curb what we call the keto flu, the transition from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. We'll talk about that for another time. And then number 3, fasting is another great way you can turn your body to using fat. Now, we'll talk about this next week in episode number 5 of Brain Hacks. But fasting, essentially what it does is you're not going to be eating from 12 hours and above. And what happens is you're now not giving your body fuel. You're not giving your body carbs or sugars. So now what does your body do? It goes, okay, we've depleted all of our sugars. After about 8 hours, your body runs through all of its sugar stores. And basically your body goes, we need some source of fuel. Where are we going to get it from? And it will look towards your own fat stores. So things like intermittent fasting are a great way to do this. We'll talk about this next week. Next one is exercise. Exercise is a really profound way to burn off a lot of sugar and get your brain using fat. And the nice thing about exercise is it has long-lasting benefits. There's so many other benefits which we talked about in another episode of Brain Hacks. And then number 5, this one I'm not as huge of a fan on for weight loss, but exogenous ketones. These are becoming a really popular supplement out there in the biohacking world, especially because exogenous ketones basically means it's ketones, which is broken down fat, that's coming from the outside. So that basically means you're drinking an exogenous ketone supplement, and it's basically helping your body get into the state of fat burning. Now, there's some ways that you can use it to help burn fat, for weight loss, but I actually prefer ketones as a way to increase your cognitive performance, because you're actually putting your brain into a fat burning state where now I'll start using ketones instead of sugar. So that I'll save for another brain hacking episode. But that's all I got for you guys this week. I hope you guys enjoy that. If you use all these at once, you're going to really help your brain switch over to that fat burning state and put your brain into a state of high performance. I'll see you guys next week.